guests are leading the charge for growth in the Indigenous entrepreneurial ecosystem. And they're driving systemic change through health equity, innovation, and impact with a look at the Indigenous economy in 2025. So please welcome co-founder and CEO of Arlo Health, Josh Gray, and general partner at Raven Capital, Althea Wishloff. Give them a nice round of applause as they come in. Thank you all.
All righty.
Woo. Test, test. We're back.
We're back. Go Jays.
Yeah. We're going to start from the top. So a little bit of a repeat. Hi, everyone. My name is Althea Wishloff. I am a general partner at Raven Indigenous Capital Partners. We invest in Indigenous and Native-led seed stage businesses across what is colonially known as the United States and Canada. I myself am a member of the Gitxsan First Nation. For those of you that do know that, that's fantastic. It's a 500-person community. My village is a 500-person community in northern British Columbia. But I have the privilege of living in Lenapehoking, also known as New York City. Prior to Raven, I was the co-CEO of a digital health company called Cobol, and before that, I was investing with another venture fund called Panache Ventures. I'm joined here today by my friend and a founder in our portfolio, Josh, who's going to introduce himself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Josh. I'm the co-founder and CEO of a startup called Arlo Health. We're a new startup here in Canada that helps bridge the gap and connect parents with family health providers in under 5 minutes via text, which is it's been pretty awesome since we launched that. A little bit about me. I and my family come from Wanapitei First Nation, which is just about 45 minutes north of Sudbury, Ontario. And before this, I was a founder for another startup called Guelpbox, which was started in the pandemic, which was acquired in 2022. So been working on Arlo for a little bit now.
Awesome. We're going to talk about Arlo a little bit later, but y'all came to this session because we're going to talk about the Indigenous economy broadly, and then we're going to get a little bit into Arlo, investing, a few other things, and we're going to leave you at the end of our segment today with 5 wonderful Indigenous or Native businesses that you can buy from this winter season. So, okay, we're going to start with an economic overview. For those that have been following in the news, the big conversation nowadays has been around Bill C-5, and specifically the Building Canada Act. Which to many Indigenous peoples, and even as Josh and I were talking backstage, the way that it passed in June 2025 in some ways constricts or eliminates the consultative process that happens with Indigenous peoples when major projects happen. So it's been a really tumultuous time where, for a number of reasons, including macroeconomic factors, the administration here in Canada is looking to accelerate our builds, but we need to be super mindful about what that means for Indigenous peoples. On the flip side of things, we've got incredible announcements. So for those of you that follow or subscribe to BDC newsletters or First Nations Bank newsletters, First Nations Bank and the Business Development Bank of Canada, BDC, recently announced a $100 million initiative to boost Indigenous communities' ability to acquire stakes in major projects. Paired with that, the Carney administration has doubled their loan back guarantee program to $10 billion to allow for these same Indigenous communities to acquire these stakes in major projects. So, Josh, as we think about this momentum, I'm curious any thoughts that you might have about these opportunities.
I think absolutely. I think there's a lot, and I think it's a complex topic where there's this tension of we're sitting here as VCs and founders of people who want to innovate and Indigenous people who want to move the world forward, and we want to innovate in big ways. And I think Bill C-5 and Build Canada is an amazing opportunity to build the kind of Canadian economy and the Canadian dynamism that we want to see. But there's a way to do it in which you don't have to trample over other people. And I think knowing that in that context and understanding that there's a right way to do business where everyone across the board wins, that's what you want to build for. And I think as Canadians, that's part of our fabric of our culture is we include others and we help build a better world for each and every person in the room without just moving forward and bulldozing through regulation. And there's a ton of projects, whether it be in energy sectors, whether it be in financial sectors, whether it be in minerals and extraction. that are very exciting and are amazing for Indigenous communities. The issue is not doing those projects, and the issue isn't even doing them faster. It's how do we bring everyone to the table in a way where everyone's taken care of, and not in the form of a handout, but in the form of doing business like you would with other colleagues. In a lot of these situations, what ends up happening is these big development projects and infrastructure projects gets built, and the Indigenous community is either tagged on as a puff piece editorial, or they don't even get consulted whatsoever. If you were to buy a property here in downtown Toronto, this is kind of my canonical example, you'd still have to buy the property from whoever owns it before that. That's just not being done at this larger scale in that same way. And so I think we want to be really clear in the fact that we're pro-building, we're pro-moving forward, we're pro-accelerating, but in the right way that actually allows for Indigenous communities to both benefit and also be at the table to be a part of those conversations.
Absolutely. Beyond just the opportunity for communities, there's a lot of opportunity for Indigenous-owned businesses and Indigenous entrepreneurs. So in 2021, the Government of Canada announced that they were going to target 5% of federal contracts going towards Indigenous-owned businesses, which is a phenomenal opportunity for companies like Arlo or other Indigenous-owned companies that we know or work with or invest in.
Absolutely.
There is a real challenge there around, the Government of Canada or even the Canadian Council for Indigenous Business sets definitions of what an Indigenous-owned business is. But in instances, we've got some, what we call like red washing or incorrectly stated, a rent-a-feather model, where Indigenous people are brought in and tokenized just for the purpose of accessing this federal procurement opportunity, which is the opposite of what it was intended for. So, it's another bit of a mixed bag where there was a program set with really great intention, but we're closely monitoring what that follow-through looks like. We were talking about a great business earlier that's operating in this space and working closely with the Government of Canada.
Race Rocks?
Yeah.
Yeah, they're a great portfolio company. I know the founder, Anita, very well. She's incredible. She's other company in Victoria, is Métis, and she's, Race Rocks is one of the biggest defense contractors in Canada that does learning for the Canadian military. So they help train all of our naval officers on how to, use machinery and weapons on submarines to freighters and all that sort of stuff. That's a great example of an Indigenous business in Canada that's punching, above their weight and doing amazing things in a really critical government sector. However, there's a lot of other sectors, and with that procurement bill, where they're able to take advantage of that. But in other cases, what happens is that Indigenous businesses are brought in, and a lot of times, a lot of these big firms will actually just pay them out and not even have them come to any meeting, do any of the work that they promise they'll be included in. They'll just get a $1 million fee, which is great, but that's not what Indigenous people want. They want to be a part of the conversation.
Absolutely. So we've got all this opportunity. We've got what some say is $40 billion in First Nation trusts and economic development corps as a result of land settlements, $7 billion in the last year alone. We've got these opportunities where communities are given the opportunity to invest in major projects. So what sentiment do we want to combat, Josh?
I think the big one is that Indigenous business is small. I think there's a notion across Canada, and I see this all the time, as an Indigenous founder, whether I'm talking with VCs, whether I'm talking with other founders, whether I'm talking to Indigenous founders that are out in the world doing crazy big projects, that there's a concept of Indigenous business equals small business. And that's just not the truth. There's a lot of data that supports the contrary. And I think when you look at these sectors, companies like Race Rocks in the military, you look at in defense, you look at some of the biggest development projects in Canada right now are being run by Indigenous development corps. There's a huge kind of tailwind that are lifting up, and Indigenous founders are playing in these big markets. And so I'm super energized and excited to see what the next decade is going to unfold. We look at kind of what I like to call the grandfather of Indigenous tech, Jeff Ward at Anamiki, really paved a way for Indigenous tech founders to start. And we're seeing through Raven's portfolio and their guidance, more and more founders come to the table and want to start. I think as Canada, Canadians as a whole, and I know we heard about this a little bit earlier in the panel before this, is, with our culture, it can be a bit hard sometimes to see the path to go from a startup, an entrepreneur, to the big guy, to the one, the big organization, the big Fortune 500. And I think, especially within the Indigenous context, it's even harder because we don't have those same role models of the founders that have raised 20 million in venture, that have gone on to create billion-dollar unicorns. But we're starting to see that path being lit now, and it's really exciting. It's exciting and encouraging to see more founders come to the table to build that sentiment.
Absolutely. A call to action I didn't think about, but thought of just now. For those of you that find yourself regularly on the West Coast, Josh and I both will be at the Indigenous Tech Circle Conference in January of 2026, where there will be an Indigenous Venture Challenge and an opportunity to witness incredible Indigenous-owned businesses in action. And Josh is exactly right. Forecasts suggest that the businesses led by Indigenous entrepreneurs will increase by 23% over the next decade, and if utilized and if engaged, could contribute annually 1.5% to Canada's GDP. So let's narrow a little bit and talk about Josh's company. So Josh is building in the health sphere. And to tie this back to the Indigenous economy, there's a lot of opportunity here. There are a lot of challenges and precedents. One of which we talked about backstage was Jordan's Principle. For those of you who are not familiar, Jordan River Anderson was born in 1999, passed away at 5 years old, because the government of Canada and the provincial governments were battling over who would handle his care as a First Nations child. And with that, Jordan's Principle was enacted to ensure that First Nations children's health is cared for, regardless of which government ultimately ends up paying for it. So, a good stage to set as Josh introduces what he's building now.
Yeah, so as I said earlier, we're building Arlo, and Arlo is a way, it's a new sort of telehealth platform here, launched in Ontario, that helps connect parents with healthcare providers. Now, some of the things that we do differently is we allow our providers and our users to actually have continuous and continuity of care. It's more longitudinal based, not transactional, not 5 minutes with a provider, then you never see them again. Once you get connected with one of our providers, you have them via text. It's text only, and you can actually follow up with them to get prescriptions, lab requests, or general questions and answers. It's something that we believe is needed in our society today, where access, while it might not be there from a cost standpoint, is difficult from a time standpoint. Especially the more rural you get, the harder it is to access care. And I think in Canada, one of the things I love the Canadian healthcare system. What we're trying to do is help that 80% of non-urgent care use cases. If you break your foot, or you break an ankle, or you have cancer, we're not the platform for you. But if you need a prescription, or you can't get to a hospital within 3 hours for something for an ER wait, we're the platform that can help you do that for you and your family. And what's been really awesome is we've been able to see these different use cases and work with people and patients on our platform that have been able to access care when they otherwise wouldn't have. A great example of that is a user, and I spoke with her to be able to share this story. And this user was born in rural Ontario, grew up in a very small town, less than 500 people, and she's still a part of her family doctor there. However, she's now moved as she grew up. She moved out of that town and moved about 4 hours away. Unfortunately, she isn't able to afford the actual travel and the gas to drive back home to see her family physician. And so her and her kids just haven't gone to the doctor unless it's an ER visit in over a decade. She has 3 little kids, all under the age of 10. And so with Arlo, what she's been able to do is actually get care and build relationships with a provider, which has been awesome for her to get access to care because it's cheap enough for her to quickly get access within minutes, rather than having to drive back to her family provider. And she can't leave her family provider because the wait lists are too long for her in her new city. And so I think there's a lot of these different use cases, especially the more rural you go, especially on reserve in communities where people don't have that same level of access as you would necessarily here downtown Toronto, where we're able to bring and govern that access for them.
It's huge.
Yeah.
We're going to talk a little bit about funding.
Yeah.
So I'll share a little bit more about Raven for the folks in the audience, and then I'd love to hear from you a little bit more about your fundraising journey, where you're at today, all those things. So for those that don't know the story, Raven was started in 2019, 6 years old now, with the purpose and mission of being the first and currently the only Indigenous-focused venture fund, with a mission to uplift the well-being of Indigenous entrepreneurs. Something that is so cool, just to gush a little bit about our organization, is we're majority Indigenous owned, which means when we invest in a business like Josh's, that ownership on the capitalization table is accretive to Indigenous ownership for the purposes of those procurement targets that we were talking about, or PAR certifications through the Canadian Council for Indigenous Business. And so it's a great example, I'm biased, of economic sovereignty in action. And it's one that I'm really, really, really proud of. As far as how we think about investments, we are a venture fund, but we are also an impact-focused venture fund. So, and impact can be defined in so many different ways and is so personal to entrepreneurs. So for some, it might look like representation is the way that you show up as an impact-focused business. So having an Indigenous CEO building among one of the first health tech companies of this kind in Canada, that is a fantastic good news story. Other companies view impact in different ways. Maybe it means trying to have the majority of their workforce be Indigenous, or the majority of the contractors that they work with be Indigenous. We also, beyond kind of how we think about that thesis, every company that we invest in, for which they're just shy of 30 now, we ask them post-investment to think about which article within the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People they would like to select to work towards. And that could look like, I already named some examples, Indigenous presence in the workforce. It could look like land stewardship. It could look like other ESG goals as it relates to climate, you name it. And so we try to drive impact not only in our thesis, but support our entrepreneurs with capital, traditional entrepreneurial support, and then also this impact level support post-investment. So it's a little bit about us.
Yeah. And to share, I mean, as someone who's been on the receiving end of working with Raven, I think one thing about, culturally speaking, as someone who's Indigenous, and I'm sure if there are Indigenous people in the room, you can relate to this, is Indigenous culture comes from a place of giving. Give first and come to the table with something to offer. And I think what's beautiful about that is there's actually a competitive edge there, and I experienced that a lot while working with Raven. A little bit of backstory. I met Raven about 1.5 years before you guys made your first investment, and it was with one of their associates. Her name's Devin. We still work with her today. She's amazing. We love her. But she was the epitome of that cultural mindset. And she came to the table, and for 1.5 years before we were at all ready to take on funding, she would give her time, she'd give her access, her network, and in a way that went past the stereotypical, send me an email and I'll forward it to somebody. It went past that level to a level of, I'm gonna be in the trenches with you. Even though we don't have a vested stake in you right now today, we wanna see this community and this ecosystem grow. And so that was the taste I was able to get with and kind of experience. And over time, when Raven decided that we wanted to work together, it was an obvious yes from our standpoint, because we knew that was the background that they were coming in with, and that was the quality of people they brought in. So it's been amazing to see the ecosystem that's spread up around Raven. Like Althea said, you have the Indigenous Tech Circle, an incredible group of tech founders and people working in tech who are Indigenous in Canada. And it's amazing to see the quality of people in that group. Ryan St. Germain, one of the founder of that, sold his company to BC Jobs, drew a private equity firm, and had a big heart and was able to bring together people. And it's been awesome to see that ecosystem grow. So we're very thankful to Raven for being a part of that and helping kind of bootstrap that ecosystem.
Yeah. Okay. We're nearing the end, and it's we want to leave you folks. We did this last year on stage with 5 Indigenous-owned companies who you could think about as you buy, I don't know, holiday gifts, or as you look to support more Indigenous entrepreneurs. And I'll story tell a little bit with each, and we'll go back and forth. We've got 5 for you, and we'll do our best to give spelling. So if you want to pull out your phones, please do. The first, no surprise, is Arlo Health. Providing parents, families, individuals with just-in-time care, led by Josh Gray of the Wanapitei First Nation.
Thank you very much. The other one we want to highlight is Birch Bark Coffee from Manitoulin. It's from Whitefish River First Nation. Mark, the founder there, is an amazing person. I love buying their coffee. I ship it. I live in Vancouver now, and I ship it all the way out there, so it's worth it.
Awesome. The third one we have for you is Bim Bamboo, which is
Great name.
say again.
Great name.
Great name. Great branding. Which is a native woman-led. She's from the Huma tribe in Louisiana, and she creates bamboo toilet paper.
Another one is Anine Anine, which is based here in Toronto. There's going to be a pop-up in one of the...
Eaton Center.
Eaton Center, yeah, there we go. Pop-up this Christmas at the Eaton Center. Chelsea, the founder, is amazing. She's from Amsterdam First Nation, and she's an amazing founder. Follow her on socials. She has great socials, very entertaining, and she has awesome merch, streetwear, and highlights a lot of Indigenous business, trying to build the first Indigenous department store here in Canada.
AANIIN.
Yeah.
And final company for you is Mini Teepee, led by Trisha and Mel. Trisha's from the Nipissing First Nation, and they create beautiful blankets and mitts, but they're known for their blankets. I've got one at home, and it keeps me cozy as we approach fall and winter season. So thank you so much. Have a great rest of your festival.
Thanks, everyone.